she's good. She's got a great guy.
Who
Super.
who did you marry?
Remember Connie Seligman?
Oh, I remember. I
Right.
remember. Of course I remember. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Long,
just
long time
please
ago. Yeah. So
send my
everything.
best to Hani. She's a great person. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Susan,
Everything.
this is this is old home week. I've only known Howie for 30 years.
Yeah. Just a few years. No, everything is good. Grandchildren is doing good. Jake, now Yaakov sends regards to you. I told him I was going to speak with you today.
Great, great.
So all is good. Yeah, he has 6 kids.
He has 6 kids?
6 kids. Yep.
Oh my gosh. Can I know?
I know. I know. He's doing fine. He's Baruch Hashem, he's doing fine.
Where does he live?
And Kochav Yaakov.
Really?
Yep.
I
Yep.
I have a close friend who lives there. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah. 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 He's very happy. Very,
Send
very.
him, please send
Well,
him my warmest regards.
I will. I will. All is
Oh,
doing fine. How the kids?
okay.
How your kids doing?
Everybody's great.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Rafi.
Well, people are going to be joining you. You guys are the early birds.
Yep.
We'll start in a few minutes. Hello, Karen. And who is down there?
Hello.
Hello, Karen.
Somebody who's under the name of Dr. Busy.
That's me, Israel Rubenstein.
Oh, hello.
How you doing? How are you?
Well, I'm glad that you joined.
Yeah, I'm glad I was invited.
Okay.
I've put a little request in the chat section. If you have a look at the chat section, that if everybody who's joining in could please put your name, a telephone number, and email address in, so we have a record of who's attended the meeting. If that's okay.
Wow.
Where do you want me to put
the
that
chat,
info
Karen.
under chat?
Yes,
Okay.
please, if you
Yeah,
don't.
my name and phone number?
Yeah, an email address, please, if you don't mind.
Okay. All right.
That actually wants deleting, but that shouldn't be there. Okay. It's just then we've got a record of who's in. Life easier. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Wendy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so pleased I'm able to make it.
I'm pleased that you are too. I'm pleased that you are too.
I thought we had a quota of only one Brit.
I'm British, I'm American.
Oh, really? You could have fooled us, that's for sure.
Yeah, the British accent doesn't leave us, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that what happens is that you become more in tune as well. So people say to me now when they're being here, oh, you're from the north of England. And I can tell, more or less where people are from as well, because you get more in tune with their accents.
You're from the north of England?
I am, yes. I'm from a place called Yorkshire.
Yorkshire, as in pudding?
Yes, as in the pudding.
And the moors.
Right.
And the moors.
Place called Leeds.
Leeds, sure.
You know Leeds? Oh, okay.
I have a son-in-law who did a summer rabbinic internship in Leeds.
Oh, really?
Years ago. Yeah. He said it rained the entire time he was there.
Oh, dear. What's your son-in-law's name?
Daniel Ben Susan.
Why does that
mean? He spent a summer, he said a very wet summer in Leeds.
Yeah, it happened.
Yeah.
So we're speaking to Dr. Goldwasser at the moment, right?
Yes, we are, Wendy.
I think so.
I wanted to say something, is that many years ago, I lived in Boca Raton for many years. And I was a therapist. And I had a client, and I sent her to you, and it changed her life.
Oh, wow.
That's very nice.
Could you have waited until everybody joined the whole call before you could say that?
She'll say
I'm just joking. Well, thank you for that.
It was a long time ago, very long time ago, when I first was in practice. And I just remember that you would have been recommended to me, and I recommended her to you because you're EMDR. And she said it changed her life.
Well, that's really more about EMDR than me, quite frankly, because
Well, it
that's,
depends actually who does it. I've heard a lot of people do different things, and it doesn't always work as well as it can. So
there's some truth to that. But that's why I'm devoted to this, because it can be very transformative.
yes,
So, Wendy, we got people coming in. At what point do we start? You said you have 12 for sure signed up?
I think so, yeah. But then again, you never know. Some people will join later, some people join as they go along. Somebody contacted me this morning through, must have been from Israel Urgenal supporters, that asked for the link as well. So yeah, so I think we'll just give it till 5 past if that's okay with you, because there are people now coming in thick and fast. So
Yeah, there are people still coming in.
so
Are you letting people in, Susan, as well?
yes, you can let people in.
No,
Just
no, I'd like for you to.
Okay.
You go ahead. You go ahead and do that, because once I get started, I won't be.
Okay, no problem. I'm happy to take charge of that.
Wendy, what's your last name?
Gordon,
And where do you live now?
I'm in Tel Aviv now. I've been here 16 years.
Let's do this. The first thing I wanted to do was doing introduction. So let's get started. Whoever's in joins in. So Wendy, you are a therapist.
Yes, I'm a clinical social worker,
Mhm.
and I went to school in Miami to do my master's, and I was in Boca for many years. I made Aliyah back in 2009, and I've lived here ever since and worked. I'm
Okay,
just
Karen, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Did you ask me to speak?
Please.
Okay, hello. Hi, I'm Karen. I'm a marriage, family, and child therapist. I've been practicing for about 20 years. At the moment, it seems most of my clients have a degree of trauma. I would almost say, who doesn't, you know, in general, even personally, we all experience, I think, a certain aspects of our life where we have some, but some definitely more than others. Um, I use a lot of like addict processing and internal family systems with parts, helping people process like the different parts of themselves with trauma. I've never been trained in EMDR. I've been curious. Many years ago, I tried it and I had a horrible experience, which I think the therapist was new and wasn't very good. And it brought out a lot because I have childhood trauma, but I've worked on it since then. But I've used more somatic work. But so I've always wondered about EMDR, like how it works, like how maybe it would be an area that I could benefit in using with clients. But I also wondered how that would personally impact me as a therapist if I've had trauma myself. Is that a good question?
Those are very good. Those are very good questions.
Okay.
Let's save that for the end. Okay.
All
Thank you,
right.
Karen.
All
Howie?
right.
You,
Hi.
Howie.
So my name is Dr. Howard Chusid. I'm a counseling psychologist. At least that's what the degree says. What that means, God only knows. And mostly I see now patients with ADD, ADHD. I see a lot of people with post-traumatic stress disorder. I work with Military One and TRICARE, so I see people or U.S. veterans and U.S. active duty soldiers all over the world. I see some Israelis, but in Israel, they need to speak English because my Hebrew isn't so good and I don't want it to be so. I understand English somewhat. At least that's what the kids said.
Howie, I'm going to invite you to my Ulpan, and we're going to work on this together. Okay.
Oh, just what I wanted, Norm.
You got it.
Norm and I go back over 30 years. We go back a whole long way.
Oh, yeah.
Which is good. So when I saw his name on here, I said, gee, I got to be here and want to say some good things. And basically, he's excellent at what he does. And I'm not just saying it because I know him and I know him well, but he really is. He's good And
Okay, Howie.
and you can
Just
send
send
me
me the
bill.
bill. Send
I
me the
know,
bill,
send me the
Howie.
bill
Okay.
later. And but
We're moving on.
we're
Moving
moving
on.
on. So basically, I work here in Israel, and I'm having some fun. So, and I
Great.
think that's the most important thing, is
Thank you,
enjoying
Howie.
what you're doing. You're
Let's
very
go to
welcome.
let's go to Sharon. Could you introduce yourself, please? You're muted.
Oh, hi, how are you? Sorry, I'm a little late. You can see me, hear me?
Yeah, just quickly who you are and what you do, where you're from.
I'm from Carnegie Run. Originally in New York. I volunteer on also the therapist side of Tikva and also the support line. Haven't taken a shift in a little while, but yeah. And clients, I see actually mostly over the computer. Therapists, like mostly women, big variety of range of age and issues, and yeah, and I don't know what
Okay.
else to say.
Welcome,
Yeah,
Sharon. And if you know
thank
Audrey
you.
Gerber, send her my regards.
Of course I do. She lives like basically diagonally from me.
Yeah, I figured. I've known her since she was a kid.
Yes, me too.
Okay, next. Let's see. That's Baruch. Go ahead, Baruch.
Yeah, hi, I'm Baruch Scheinfeld. I'm a retired physician, and I'm interested in what Nachum Gowasser does with the soldiers to help them.
Okay. Thank you. There's a phone 914. You want to introduce yourself, please? I don't know who that is. Okay, we'll move on. Suzanne, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi, I'm a clinical psychologist with almost 40 years experience from New York City. I'm one of the administrators. Tick Fund started last November after the horrible incidents of October 7th. I have worked, I'm currently in Washington, D.C., and I worked with U.S. military through TRICARE, soldiers in active combat. I also work with lone soldiers through Tikva, currently on Zoom, and work with war journalists all over the world. And I have worked with survivors of the Paris and London terrorist attacks of 2015 and 16. So a lot of trauma experience, and I've never used MDR, never used MDR. Very curious about it.
Oh, welcome. Welcome. Leslie?
Hi, I'm Leslie Kersner. I am currently in New Jersey. I'm down the shore by the beach and very happy to be here. I am a multi-faith chaplain of 25 years. I have clinical pastoral education and specialized in psychiatry.
Welcome, Leslie. Karen?
Is that me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in sunny Cape Town, South Africa, and I am on the mental health volunteer for Tikva, as well as sometimes answering the call center and in the marketing group. And I am a life coach. I work a lot with tools such as the Enneagram, and yeah, I'm very curious to hear about this EMDR. I've only heard about it, and I'm really fascinated.
Welcome. And by the way, I've been to Cape Town twice, and it's probably the most beautiful place on earth.
Yes, that's true.
Pearl, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Pearl Lopian. I'm an EFT tapping trainer, practitioner. I've been doing that for over 15 years. I work with trauma a lot, and I teach these modalities. I'm very curious. I know there's so many similarities. I'm curious to hear about the similarities and the differences and want to know more.
Wonderful.
So
welcome. Great.
Yeah.
And where are you located, Pearl?
I'm in Jerusalem. I opened up a WhatsApp group on October the 8th, and I did daily tapping with people in my group.
Beautiful.
After a year, I don't show up every day anymore, but about twice a week. So I've been helping in that way. Besides,
wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, Yael, please introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm not sure if that me because there's two Yaels.
Okay, yeah, you, Yael.
Okay. I'm Yael Schumann. I actually am EMDR certified. I've been for at least 5 years. I've been doing EMDR for over 10. I was trained to work with military and first responders and assist and I can't remember all the other initials that are behind it, but I can do crisis group interventions doing EMDR. And I'm currently homeless in a way of we sold our house in Colorado and currently in Florida visiting family, and then we're going to find our home somewhere on the East Coast of the United States.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Izzy, introduce yourself, Dr. Izzy. You're muted, Izzy.
Muted.
You're still muted.
Please unmute. Yeah. Have you done it now?
Not yet.
No, it hasn't.
Okay, well, while you're trying to unmute, let's see. Ariel, you want to introduce yourself? Ariel Lax. We're just introducing ourselves quickly. Let's see who's unmuted. Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi.
Oh, okay, Ariel, go ahead.
Hi. Nice to meet all of you. I'm an art therapist. I live in Modi'in. I practice with children, adolescents, and I do Adrichat Horim for the parents as well.
Wonderful, welcome.
Thank you.
Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself? You have to unmute. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Yaffe, and I'm curious about this. And I am a social worker, but I'm not practicing in Israel.
That's okay. You're still welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Shalom, I'm Hannah. I'm a marital and family counselor. I'm a narrative therapist, a teacher. I'm a clinical sociologist with 45 years experience. I work in Modi'in in Jerusalem.
Wow.
Shalom.
So in previous trainings, in the trainings I've done, the narrative therapists that were there found that what we do is very resonant to what you do. You'll see a lot of convergence with what you've learned and how EMDR works, because there's a lot of narrative therapy aspects to it.
Great, thank you.
Sonia, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, nice to meet you all. I finished my MA in clinical psychology, and I'm looking for an internship. And I just find the topic of EMDR very interesting, so just wanted to join.
ברוכה הבאה. סיגל, בבקשה.
Hi, I'm Sigal Lioness. I'm a psychologist and a relationship and family therapist and an IFS therapist. I've had my own clinic in Israel for the last 13 years. And I have clinics in Tel Aviv, Ra'anana, and online. And I actually did EMDR as a client about 10 years ago for about 3 years. I'm really fascinated in it. And it really resonated with me, and doing this today, although I have to leave soon, so I'll get to the recorded part, because a lot of childhood traumas that I had, I managed to really eliminate through EMDR. So I'm very fascinated in it.
Okay, welcome. Two more people. Sonia, if you can unmute, please. Izzy, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, let me see if I'm unmuted.
You're good. You're good, Izzy. We hear you.
I'm a psychologist based in Yerushalayim, and I know very little about EMDR and looking to learn from the expert.
Okay. Well, as soon as he gets on board, we'll start. Yeah. You're gonna have to get used to my sense of humor. Sometimes it actually works.
Okay.
All right. So let me just first welcome everybody. Just want to tell you a little bit about myself and why we're doing this. I'm a clinical psychologist. I am currently based in Miami Beach and in the process of making Aliyah. I'm, as they say in Spanish, "Higuiasman." It's time to come home. I actually was here on October 7th at a hotel with my family, Neve Ilan. I'm sure you familiar with that. And we had on October 7th, a missile imploded right on top of them, and the whole building shook, and there was a lot of trauma. One of the women who was there was with us in shul, had been at Sbarro 10, 15 years earlier, and she became re-traumatized, and she became totally dysregulated, and I actually did EMDR right there because she had really imploded emotionally. And during the course of the next few days that we were there, I saw that EMDR was extremely helpful with a number of people who were traumatized because we were getting constant sirens, and I ended up staying for 2 weeks to help people. I got on a couple of chats and was in different cities helping people. And I realized that sitting in Miami Beach and watching all that's going on here was just very frustrating and unsettling. So I've actually been here 5 times, working with soldiers, families, and just individuals, because the whole country is traumatized. And I've been doing EMDR for 30 years now. I'm a clinician, consultant, trainer, and I have really experienced, not just in terms of my own clinical experience, but just what the research shows, how superior EMDR is in terms of the efficacy, in terms of treating trauma, but also there have been a number of research articles that compare EMDR with other trauma modalities, such as PE, prolonged exposure, which is a favorite of some people, as well as other treatment modalities. And across the board, EMDR comes out being more effective, efficient, and rapid in terms of its resolution. And it's based on a paradigm of rapid resolution. And you'll understand why when we go through this. What's going on today in this country is really extraordinary because there are so many levels of trauma that are happening, and the resources are limited. And the reason why I'm doing this seminar as well as doing formal training is because the need is great, and the need to have training for something like EMDR is significant, and that's why I'm actually going to be doing training for Kupat Cholim therapists because they're dealing with enormous amount of trauma and they're not trained. And I think the Misrad Briut Nafshi, I think that's what it's called. When they saw the protocol that I developed to adapt for Israel, that's when they decided that they need to get on board. So my mission is to expose as many clinicians as possible to EMDR and encourage you to get trained. We'll talk about training at the end. So let's start. Susan,
can I ask you something? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is there any way for someone like me that I'm not licensed, but I'm certified in Israel to get trained with EMDR? Because
when you say you're certified in Israel, what does that mean?
That means that I don't have a license because I don't have a master's in psychology or social work. I have a BA, and I went to a training program, Path Center in Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing start therapy. And I spoke to the EMDR, I don't know exactly who, like EMDR center here. And basically there's like no chance that I could be accepted to the training there because I don't have a master's. And he really spoke to me for half an hour, and he was very, very kind on the phone. I don't even know if, whatever, like he understood what I was saying, because he said
Yeah,
he gets it that there's such a big demand for it and such a big
yeah.
like need for it. At the
So
same
you,
time, it's almost like they're covering their whatever it is. They don't
well,
want to ruin
actually,
the name of
yeah,
EMDR.
we can talk about this towards the end, but let me just answer your question. Try to understand that trauma can be very complex. And there are
I know.
times when there's and we're going to talk about the different types of trauma, but there can be an acute trauma, car accident, don't want to drive, pretty simple. But there are times when a person gets traumatized and there are layers of trauma underneath that. And then all of a sudden you're exposing yourself to many different clinical complexities. And it's really important that people are trained as clinicians in order to practice EMDR. And that's why the standard is to be licensed. It's just, there's no way around it. And the training that I'm doing also requires some sort of clinical license. The one thing I would encourage anyone who's not licensed is to do whatever you need to do to get trained, to get licensed, so that you are able to function at a level that can handle the complexities that come aboard when you're dealing with trauma patients. So we're going to move forward. We can talk about this afterwards. And I'm sorry if that's just the way it is, because trust me, when you get into the field of trauma and you realize what you're dealing with, and I'm sure that those of you who are on the call with years of experience, you understand that training experience, there's no substitute for training and experience when you're dealing with complexities. I hope that makes sense to you, Sharon.
I agree with the experience. I disagree with the actual masters because I think that there's a lot of training that
And there's truth to that.
people after going the master's program goes to training programs here, like because they're not prepared or whatever it is, and the experience is vital. I agree with that.
It's true. It's
but
true.
If people that are not licensed are not going to be able to be trained in stuff like EMDR and all kinds of other things, then that's a real huge shame.
So Sharon, there's a legitimate discussion here. Let's save it to the end.
Yeah.
Okay?
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to.
Let's save it to the end because I have some things to discuss that actually validate what you're saying. Okay. Susan, if you can put the first slide on, please.
Yes, it's a pleasure. No, there we go. It worked.
Okay, I don't see it. Did you all see the first slide?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yes.
You can see the slide? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't. I'll pull it up on my phone. Okay, so this is an overview of what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to first talk about definitions, elements of what trauma is about. We're going to talk about the different types of trauma. It's not a unitary concept. Then we're going to do an overview of EMDR, a general description. Then we're going to talk about the neurobiology of trauma. What happens in the nervous system when a person gets traumatized? And then how does EMDR work? Why does it work? At the end, I have a soldier that I've been working with for quite a while who wants to talk to you all. And he's become very passionate about spreading the word about EMDR to other soldiers and people who've been traumatized. He actually spoke on a podcast. And I just casually mentioned I was doing this training. He goes, I want to talk to them. I want to tell them. So you'll hear him. He's a lovely guy who's really was transformed as a result of EMDR. And then we'll have time for questions and discussion and then about training. All right? So next slide, please. So before we get started, I'd like to go over some definitions. So without looking at the slide, actually, take the slide off. Let's see if we can get some feedback from people. How would you define trauma? Anyone?
Something that's deeply disturbing.
Something deeply disturbing. Good. What else?
Definitely.
Anyone else?
When there's shock, helplessness, powerlessness, and isolation, when something happens like
Good.
that.
Shock. So disturbing, shock, helpless. Good. What else?
An experience that's overwhelming, either once or continuously, that can't be integrated and can't be clarified.
Excellent. Overwhelming and can't be integrated And there's another word, anybody that can't be what?
Processed.
Processed. Excellent. Who said that?
Stuck. Me, Sharon. The
Sharon.
one that's not listening. So. Go on.
Rub it in, Sharon. That's okay. Good. Yeah, it's not processed, and we'll explain the neurobiology behind it. Okay. Anybody else have anything? Because those are very good. Anyone else? Okay. So now we can show the slide.
Which one? Back to
The elements of trauma. Okay, y'all see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a deeply disturbing or distressing event. And as we said, it's an element of unexpected shock. It comes out from nowhere. It's unexpected. It's not something that one would expect to happen. It also lasts well beyond the event. Trauma doesn't just come and go. It stays in the nervous system. And responses can vary. They can be emotional, cognitive, physical, sensory. And I'm going to add one more, spiritual. A lot of the people that I work with who've gone through different types of trauma can either enhance their spirituality or they lose it. It can go one way or the other. So trauma can be experienced many different ways. Next slide, please. So when we talk about trauma, there isn't one singular unitary way of looking at trauma. There are different types of trauma. The primary trauma is the actual traumatic event. I'm going to use an example, which I normally use when I do this lecture, of a child that's been sexually abused, and he tolerates it, and it's affecting him. His grades are going down, and finally he goes to the principal, or he goes to his parents, and say, so and so is molesting me, and I can't take it anymore. So when you experience from people that you would expect to support you, and they turn around and blame you and shame you. For instance, how could you say that? You know how this is, he's your Rebbe. How could you even think that? What were you thinking? What is in your head? That's secondary trauma. It's called betrayal trauma. The research is very clear that the secondary trauma can have much more damaging long-term effects in terms of PTSD than the primary trauma. If you go through a primary trauma and it's handled well, there's an intervention, you're supported, you don't necessarily. Sorry?
Can everybody just...
Sorry, that was just me. Sorry about that. I'll mute.
Yeah,
Okay,
please,
thank you.
everybody just mute themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. So secondary trauma is almost always more damaging than the primary trauma itself. And then that leads to tertiary trauma, PTSD, prolonged impact on of the traumatic event on the person. So let's take this to the situation we're in now. Let's talk it from a broader perspective. October 7th, primary trauma. Terribly shocking event. I have images of being at that hotel and the please mute. And the one of the managers of the hotel, actually a very lovely Arab man that was very protective of us, showing me his phone with the images. Remember, this was on Shabbat and Simchat Torah, of what was going on in Gaza. And I remember the words like it was yesterday. He's saying, something terrible is happening down south. Now that's in my head. So that's the primary trauma. What do you think is secondary trauma? If you look at the model that we just talked about. What's going on in the world today?
Denial.
Right, the world, yeah. The world blaming us. And,
correct.
You know,
everything is turned around. It's mubal. It's confused. We're being gaslighted. Israel is being blamed and mischaracterized and slandered, committing genocide. That's betrayal trauma. That's the secondary trauma.
And each person will take it in a different way. Like one person will really be affected by the betrayal trauma of the world reacting, and other people will be like, go fly a kite, I don't care.
So you're making an excellent point. You have two people experiencing the exact same trauma, and they may have totally different reactions and total different experience. And that's why, as a clinician, it's very important to assess that. You don't want to assume that a person has PTSD just because they went through trauma. There's some people that are more resilient than others. And some people may experience less of a trauma, but have a more deleterious reaction, deleterious impact because their resilience is low, or they have prior trauma experience of being re-traumatized. For example, when I was in the Mamad in that hotel, there were probably 30 people in Mamad, there were another 100 in the Miklat. Not everyone reacted the same. There were some that were calm and they just went on about their business afterwards. And like the woman in the Sparrow bombing, she completely fell apart. So that's a very good point. And that's why it's important as a clinician to assess and not assume. So let's move on in terms of the different types of trauma. So that's primary, secondary, and tertiary. Vicarious trauma. How many of us are experiencing trauma from what we're witnessing in the news, even though we may not have experienced it? I'm not in Gaza. I'm not in Lebanon. But I'm very affected by it. When I see these pictures of these boys on Arut Sheva, I'm just, it's devastating. It's not my son. It's not my brother. I don't even know these boys. But I'm still traumatized. I imagine the pain of the parents, the wives, the children. And some of them are not boys. Some of them are fathers. Some of them, it's a grandfather that was in the Miluim. That's vicarious trauma. And we can't minimize that because who in this country isn't experiencing some level of vicarious trauma? And that's why it's so critically important that we have the resources to help people that aren't necessarily directly affected by it, but they're indirectly affected, which is vicarious trauma. Intergenerational trauma. The traumatic experiences of the wives, parents that are being experienced now could spill over to the next generation and the generation afterwards. Anybody know what that's called in biological terms?
Genome?
Epigenetics. Epigenetics is when the experiences of a prior generation is actually encoded in the DNA and can be passed on for future generations. We see that in the Holocaust literature. Children of Holocaust survivors are much higher risk of mental illness, even though the genetics may not be there, but the epigenetics are there. The trauma's passed on. We don't know what is going to happen down the road in terms of the years to come epigenetically. How the children and grandchildren of victims, these Nova survivors, what they experienced, how that's going to pass on to the children. We don't know. But we know that intergenerational trauma is a real thing. And it's obviously it's not just epigenetic, it's also stories. My parents are Holocaust survivors. The stories of what they went through, of course, affected me. How much of it was epigenetic? I don't know. I'm sure there's some. That's why I'm a psychologist, right? We all have our Pekla. Perpetrator trauma. This is extremely important in what we're dealing with today. I'll tell you a story. This is actually the first person that I worked with. He was he was from the Miluim, and actually he was the second one who heard about when I was on the base. somebody had to be a Nachshon ben Aminadab to be the first person to try the EMDR, and it was very effective. And he came back, and this second guy says, "I need help." He when he was in Gaza, he thought he was shooting a terrorist, and he shot a child. And the image of the child, and he was describing it, falling back, and the blood coming. I don't go through all the details. Can't sleep. Overwhelming amount of guilt. Sensitive person, and that's called perpetrator guilt or moral injury. How many soldiers are dealing with this now? Now, a lot of them, as the person said, it depends on the person. Some are saying, what's for breakfast? But there are others that are more sensitive and are more aware of the fact that they took an innocent life, and they can't justify it.
Are you okay with me interrupting? I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that even those that seem to be okay and they're wrong with breakfast, as an example, they're also like they could have it like delayed.
Excellent point.
I watched what's it called? I forgot. It was like a whole thing that they spoke about, and they said only now are people able, like these soldiers and whatever it is, are able to talk about October 7th and what they went through on that day. And it's like, a year later or whatever it is, they can't process it right away. They also are not able, they can't give themselves permission because they're out there in the field. They can't.
Yes. So first of all, let me make you're not interrupting, you're interjecting, and that's very helpful. Like what you said is extremely important, and I'll tell you why. Because you're right. Just because they aren't experiencing it in the moment doesn't mean that it hasn't had a psychological impact that may happen later, which is why it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. It can be delayed. It's interesting. I was at a base near Be'eri. I forgot the name. Forgot what the name of the base was. It starts with a Dalet. And at first, we had a hard time getting soldiers to come in. Nah, I'm okay. Any trauma. And once we were there long enough, several of them came and said, maybe I do. But the defenses don't allow them to acknowledge it. And sometimes those defenses are healthy because they got to keep fighting. They got to keep, this is a reprieve. They had to go back to Gaza. So sometimes it's adaptive. And then what's adaptive at the beginning becomes maladaptive later. So I'll give you an example, which is why your point is so well taken. I saw a lovely man from the Ukraine who left with his family because of the war, and they immigrated to Israel. And then October 7th happened. You can imagine. And when I asked him, "Ma trauma shelcha?" He said, "Trauma sheli lo me'hamilchama." I said, "Me'hamishpacha." His wife said, "Ani lo makicha otcha." I don't recognize you. He was emotionally shut down, emotionally disconnected. And she couldn't tolerate it. The children didn't recognize him, which we know from the literature in terms of PTSD. It's called psychic numbing. So if you're in battle, that's adaptive. When you come home, it's devastating. You're a shell.
That's
and
a lot of.
Sorry?
That's what we're seeing a lot of with the soldiers that we're working with in our program.
Yes.
Relationship problems because they don't know how, after they've been away for a long time, they don't know how to relate to their partners.
That's right.
They're used to their combat unit or their unit, whatever they're in. Their language has changed. The way of living has changed for an extensive period of time. Plus what they have seen or heard or smelt, because remember, it's a lot of triggers from different senses that we see. And I had one person that came back from the army, and he went home and he said to his partner, all I could smell is death. And he was going around the room, desensitizing the house because his trauma was the smell of death. So some people, and this is what I said right at the very beginning and when October the 7th impacted, we had over 250 lone soldiers in our organisation getting free weekly therapy. All disappeared overnight, quite rightly, because they'd all gone to war. However, I said, when people were volunteering to come into us, I said, it's not now. It might be in a year's time. It might be in 18 months' time when the impact starts to trickle through. And I think we're just maybe starting for that impact to trickle through now, because we're hearing more about the war in the intakes that we're doing. But it's years. It's going to be years. It's not going to be months and days. It's going to be years before the volume of the trauma that this country and people here have experienced is going to be exposed. And I think through what you said, intergenerational trauma will be the way some of that's exposed, because the kids themselves are experiencing the loss of a parent or a brother.
That's right. That's right. So I want to share with you, I'm working on a conference that we're hoping to do in March around Purim. We're working with people with the Misabri Nafshi and different trauma organizations. We want to bring different professional groups, secular, religious, together to talk about what's called reentry syndrome, which is exactly what you're talking about, and how to recover, how to teach resilience. So we're working on that conference. We'll let you know as it develops. But we're going to move on. And the last is the traumatic loss. When those officers show up at a door, you know why they're there. One woman that I worked with, it was, and by the way, I wanted to tell you, by the way, about that Ukrainian soldier. One EMDR session, within about 10, 15 minutes of doing the EMDR, he started crying uncontrollably. And I said, Baruch haba la'atzufa. Back to yourself. And from then on, the whole session was transformed. And I asked her, how are you feeling? And you know what he said? I want to go home and hug and kiss my wife. One session. That's why it's rapid resolution, and we'll explain why. So the last one is traumatic loss. This woman's son was a, how do you say commander again in Hebrew? I forgot. He was a commander of his gedud, father of 4 children. Mefaked hagdud, Ken. הוא היה מפקד הגדוד, 4 children, in his 40s, strong, fearless, bold man. And he got killed on October 7th in near Oz, trying to battle the terrorists. And her daughter, who lives in Miami, begged me to go see her, and of course I did. I walked in. You could see she was a shell of a woman, and her entire apartment, it was like a shrine for her son. And he died in October, and I went to see her when I was here in March. So 6 months afterwards, pictures all over. She mamash had not left her apartment. Her groceries come in, she quit her job, she sits in her apartment. And that's why the family's so disturbed, because she basically stopped living. And as we were doing the EMDR, and her image, the target image that we're working on, was opening the door and the officers there. And she knew. And when I asked her what negative cognition, what thought comes in, she goes, how can I live my life when he's gone? She was feeling guilt about living her life when he can't live his life. So she stayed home. And as a result of the EMDR, we tried to change that. We tried to help her reprocess it. Got her to the point where I basically asked her a simple question: would your son want you to be like this? And that just changed her whole perspective. And she started crying. She said, Betachla. And by the end of the session, we were talking about what she can do. She had grandchildren that needed help, a daughter-in-law that needed help. The next day, she went to her daughter's house and helped to babysit. One session. This is the transformative nature of EMDR. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what is this thing called EMDR. So there are a couple of things about what EMDR is. So the psychologist who discovered it, and I'll explain to you when we talk about the neurobiology of the trauma, what happened, how she discovered it. She developed a word called syncletic, which is the synthesis of eclectic. It's not just one model. It's based on a number of different models, which is why I think it's so powerful. It's just psychoanalytic. It's not somatic. It's not schematic. It's not cognitive. It's not emotive. It's relaxed. It's all of that. All of that is included in EMDR, which is why it's such a powerful intervention. It's also based on an accelerated processing model. When a person gets traumatized, as we'll explain in the neurobiology section, the nervous system shut down. There's no processing. So what EMDR does is it unleashes the stuck processing mechanism of the nervous system in an accelerated way so that a person can recover very quickly. That's why EMDR is so critical, because there's an overwhelming need. You don't have time for 6 or 8 sessions. Insurance company won't pay for more than 3 or 4. And people are in tremendous amount of pain. You need something that's accelerated, that can happen quickly. And when I'm going to these cases, I get one chance. I'm not going to see them again. I need to be able to do something that's going to have an impact right away. And there is no, trust me, I'm trained in PE. I'm a certified hypnotherapist. I lived for hypnotherapy before I got trained in EMDR. I haven't done hypnotherapy since, except for cigarette smoking. It's based on desensitization, which is an emotional desensitization and a somatic sensitization. We're looking at taking down the intensity of the emotion, as well the intensity of the somatic memory, the bodily sensations that are still absorbed in the body, as well as cognitive reprocessing and schematic. A schema, you all know what a schema is? It's like a cognitive template. It's a theme. And for those people who have gone through betrayal traumas, a common schema is, I'm not safe. The world's not safe. People aren't safe. Relationships aren't safe. EMDR helps to break down those dysfunctional, maladaptive schemas and replace them with more adaptive. EMDR does not erase the trauma. This is not like a delete button, and they have no recall. That's not possible. What it does is it desensitizes the emotions in ways that we'll talk about in a minute, and allows for detachment so that you're not so attached, and for reprocessing of the event. So before we go any further, I want to share with you how I fell into EMDR and why I'm so passionate about it. When I was only 29 years old, and I was doing my doctoral internship at a veterans hospital in Richmond, Virginia, where I did my training. My first rotation was on the heart transplant unit. Any veteran in the military, the United States military, that needs a heart transplant comes to the Richmond VA. And those patients who've had heart transplants are on a drug called cyclosporine, which is an immunosuppressant, suppresses the immune system. And as a result of that, their immune systems are compromised. So we were required to take a flu shot. It was November, beginning of flu season, and we all had to take flu shots if we wanted to be on that unit. I was a kid. They asked me to take a flu shot. I took a flu shot. I never had one before. And 2 weeks later, I started not feeling well. I was feeling very weak, very schwach. And I started having these abnormal sensations in my hands, my feet. And I didn't understand what was going on. I happened to be doing another rotation on the neurology unit. And I spoke to a neurologist who, in his great infinite wisdom, he diagnosed me as intern fatigue syndrome. Okay. I wasn't working that hard, regular hours, it didn't resonate. But once we connected the dots between the flu shot and my symptoms, it became apparent that I was having something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's an ascending paralytic illness. It's an autoimmune disease, an autoimmune reaction that my immune system reacted to the antigen of the immunization of the flu shot, and instead of attacking the antigen, it attacked my nervous system. It attacked the myelin sheath around my nerves, and I was completely myelinated. I was paralyzed. I was 29 years old, wife, kids. How we knew my wife, and I was in ICU on a respirator for 6 weeks, hospital for 3 months, and I had to go to rehab hospital to learn how to walk. You think there's a little trauma there? Poquito. So thank God I recovered 95% eventually, and I moved down to Miami. And people heard about the story. I was asked to speak at a Beaker Colon dinner. And as I was talking, I started crying. When I told the story, I had an image of my wife, pregnant, kids coming, and my parents all devastated because they didn't, at some point they weren't sure I'm going to make it. And I was overwhelmed by the guilt that I caused them. And I was crying. It was very, very uncomfortable. A colleague of mine came over to me afterwards and said, I just got trained in this trauma treatment that is really incredible. I want you to try. So she described it to me, rapid eye movement. And I said, oh, come on. It's like the snake oil of the 90s. But she encouraged me to give it a try. And she asked me to choose my most difficult patient so that she can demonstrate how effective. I said, you know what, I'll give it a try. I knew exactly who my most difficult patient was. He was a man in his late 30s who had already been divorced twice, was engaged, and that was going south. Rage problem, narcissism, and his story was that he was also a child of Holocaust survivors, but unlike me, had really wonderful parents in a lot of ways. His mother was a Mengele victim, and she'd gone through terrible trauma, and she was emotionally dysregulated. And his father was also a survivor, but was completely shut down. He grew up in Canada, and he had a experience when he was a kid that he was a newspaper boy, delivery boy, and he was riding his bike and he slipped on the ice and he got hit by a car. And he hobbled his way home to crying. He hurt his leg. He was injured. He opened the door. His mother saw the bike, yelled at him, hit him across the face for destroying the bike. No awareness that he was hurt, that he was crying, he was upset. And that was the image the story that he used in terms of why he's so rageful. And this woman did EMDR, and within an hour, he was able to desensitize it. But more importantly, he was able to reprocess it because he was able to access through his left brain what she had gone through. And the rage turned into empathy. And from that point on, therapy changed. It was a totally different person. And that's when I decided I'm signing up. And I actually did EMDR on my trauma at training. And one session, and it was a long session, and the poor guy that was stuck with me as a partner, you can imagine what it was like. But as a result of that EMDR session, I couldn't feel it anymore. It was like, instead of being right here, right behind my eyes, ready to explode, it was way back there, way back. I was emotionally detached from it. But more importantly, I had identified myself as called GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS victim. And I was a victim of this paralyzing illness. And after that EMDR session, I no longer felt myself. I didn't want to define myself. It was Maseh Shahaya. It happened. Okay. It happened. I recovered. And from that point on, I don't really think about it. I have no emotional attachment to it. And because I reprocessed it, I kind of look at, okay, you know what? I got through it. I was resilient. It's no longer a peckle that I'm carrying. It's something that just happened. So that's how I fell into EMDR. And that's why I'm passionate about it, because I want to share what I've experienced as a trauma victim, which I'm not anymore. And I'm not even a trauma survivor. I'm a trauma thriver. I've learned a lot from that experience. So let's talk about how this works. The next slide, please. So you don't have to, you can read it, but I'm going to explain it to you. So the brain is organized bihemispherically. There are two hemispheres of the brain, the right brain and the left brain. The right brain is where the limbic system is predominant. The limbic system is the emotional part of the brain. It's also where the hippocampus is predominant, which is the memory center of the brain. So emotions, memory, right brain. Left brain is the processing centers of the brain. This is the logical, rational, reality-based part of the brain. Right brain, emotions and memory, left brain, processing, reality, logic. So when a person goes through normal life and they have an experience, the entry portal through which that experience is processed is the right brain. It activates the right brain, and that in turn activates the left brain. They integrate, and then they process the experience, and then it dissipates in the nervous system. Next thing happens, activates the right brain, that activates the left brain, they integrate, process, or as Susan says, process, and it dissipates into the nervous system. That's normal life. Otherwise, we'd all be Michigan. We would be all sensory overload. We have to have a processing mechanism to help us regulate. The problem is that when a person experiences a trauma, which we define as something sudden, unexpected, shocking, overwhelming, and someone had mentioned something you can't process. Well, this is why you can't process. Because it enters the right brain, like everything else. But this time, instead of just activating the right brain explodes because of the trauma. And all of the neurological energy in the nervous system rushes to the right brain to feed that all that emotional activity. What do you think happens to the left brain? Anybody? We won't judge you, don't worry. Anyone take a chance? What happens to the left brain? The right brain is where all the action is. It shuts down. Goes offline. There's no activity there. So what doesn't happen? There's no process.
No processing.
There's no processing, sorry. So the trauma stays stuck in the right brain, in the hippocampus, raw and unprocessed, with all of the associated thoughts, feelings, images, smells, body reactions, they're all there, stuck. So when the conscious brain is paralyzed like that, it's just stuck, the unconscious brain kicks in and tries to process it through dreams. And as soon as we start to dream, our eyes go back and forth. It's called rapid eye movement, REM. Now, we've known about REM for 100 years. Freudians talked about it, but nobody really understood it until the end of the last century. And this is where the history of EMDR comes in. So in 1989, a psychologist named Dr. Francine Shapiro, who was a research psychologist, she was not a clinical psychologist, she experienced something serendipitously, just by accident, that she noticed that when she was re-experiencing a trauma, her eyes started to move back and forth spontaneously. And she realized that she was feeling calmer and that she was able to see it from a different angle. And she thought, that's pretty curious. I wonder what that's about. So she conjured up another trauma, went through it and started moving her eyes back and forth, and same thing happened. So she tried this with her friends and family, and without exception, they were all experiencing that same feeling of detachment, desensitization, and that they could see it at a different angle. So then she decided that if she's going to do this as a research project, she needed to have actual clinical subjects. So she chose 3 groups of trauma victims that are generally seen as the most severe. Vietnam War veterans who'd seen combat trauma, rape victims, and adults who were sexually abused as children. And she started to experiment this rapid eye movement treatment, and with all 3 of those populations, and she saw the same results, that there was significant desensitization, detachment from the emotion of the experience, and the ability to see it differently and in a more adaptive way. And she called it eye movement desensitization and reprocessing as a result of EMDR. So this happened in the early 90s, and she started to develop this and came and started her first training in 1994. I was the second wave of trainees at the beginning of 95. And when I got trained, she had a narrative that we don't know how or why this is. We just know it works. When I was a kid, I had a fairly new PhD. I'm not going to challenge her. That's what the expert says. We just go along with it. But in 1995, a neuropsychiatrist in Amsterdam, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, who was then and now seen as the preeminent expert in the neurobiology of trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, heard about EMDR, and there was some controversy. I think in Britain, how do you call it? Controversy? Whatever. Around EMDR, mostly from the psychiatric field and the pharmaceutical field, which is not difficult to understand because it was very threatening. If you can resolve trauma in 1 or 2 sessions, 3 sessions, as opposed to being in psychoanalysis for 20 years, 3 times a week, I would be threatened also if I was a psychiatrist. There was a lot of pushback in the literature. And he came over, and he was blown away by what he experienced in terms of how EMDR has this rapid resolution of trauma that unlike he's ever seen before. But he was disturbed by that comment. He actually stood up in the training and he challenged her. And he said, listen, this is an amazing treatment, but you can't expect to be accepted in the medical community, the professional community, the pharmaceutical industry, if you can't explain how this works. Well, she was a research psychologist. She's not a neurobiologist. And it was clear that she took it to the point where that she could as a research psychologist. So he went back to Amsterdam and set up a lab and did an ingenious experiment. He recruited a large number of trauma victims, and he did PET scans for each one of them, baseline PET scans. If you know what a PET scan is, it's basically a neurological test of neurological activity based on glucose utilization. It looks like a weather map, a radar map. Blue is very little or no neurological activity, green is low, yellow is high, and red is intense, just like a radar map. And lo and behold, when he did the baseline PET scans, there was a very dramatic imbalance in most of these trauma victims. Without being triggered, their right brain was more activated than their left, and especially in the hippocampal and limbic areas. And the left brain was lower than average. It was lateralized, it was imbalanced, which was really the first time anybody really looked at that and saw that, wait a minute, there are real neurological differences in people who've gone through trauma. So then he asked them to re-experience their trauma. And immediately afterwards, he did another PET scan. What do you think he saw? Anyway. Come on. This isn't too difficult.
It shut down the right side the left side got overloaded and the right side.
It's actually the half.
The opposite. Yeah,
yeah.
I said I might be saying it the opposite.
That's right.
The emotional side got overwhelmed, and the other side, the processing side.
The right brain exploded. There was red all over the place, especially in the hippocampus and limbic system, and very little blue or green. And the left side was all blue or green. There was no activity. The processing center shut down. Then he had an EMDR clinician who he brought over from the States, who was trained to do EMDR on all these subjects. And that's when the dramatic results came. After one EMDR, and the instructions were to a protracted EMDR until it was completely resolved. That was the criteria. And he did one more PET scan. And that's where it was shocking. And all the energy shifted to the left. The processing centers lit up. The areas of the brain that focus on logic, reasoning, went back online, and the right brain calmed down, mostly blue and green, a couple of dots still residual in some of them, but the entire brain shifted. The brain changed as a result of one EMDR session. And that's when he thought he had pay dirt, until he asked the question, wait a minute, we were describing what is happening, what EMDR does, we still don't know how. What's the mechanism behind this? And he suspected that it was neurochemical in nature. So we hired a neurochemist to set up a chemistry lab where they could really see chemical reactions in the brain. And he did the EMDR, the rapid eye movement, but this time looking at chemical reactions in the brain. And what they found, amazingly, was that there was a chemical that was being released that they could see travel to the areas of the limbic system that disrupted the neurological connection between the limbic system and the traumatic memory. It was an enzyme. It is an enzyme. And what do we know about enzymes? Enzymes break things down. It broke down the neurological connection, so you couldn't feel anymore. The connection between the traumatic memory and the limbic system was disconnected. That explains the desensitization. But they also discovered that this chemical travels to the hippocampus. And it also breaks down the connection between the hippocampus and the traumatic memory. And it degrades the memory trace. That's why when you wake up and you know you had a dream but you can't get it, that's because of REM. It's degraded the memory trace. So he realized that this is what the underlying mechanism of EMDR, that it's actually rewiring the brain and not allowing us to feel it. It becomes desensitized. And once it gets desensitized, it's in the left brain where you can reprocess. You can see things from a different angle. You're not processing it emotionally anymore. You're processing it logically. And quite often, like for example, somebody who's abused as a child, I'm sure many of you have dealt with people who've been sexually abused as children. What's the most common reaction of a person who's been molested as a child? Anyone want to care to guess? I'll tell you the sentence. You finish the word. It's my
fault. It's
fault.
It's
my fault. It's about me.
Yeah.
It's something about me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the maladaptive, dysfunctional way of interpreting that experience because it's in the right brain. But once you do EMDR with someone who's gone through that, and it could be a rape victim, it could be something along those lines, kind of abuse, and they go in the left brain, and you ask them how do you want to reframe that, or if you try to help them reframe it and say, this is not about me, it was about something seriously wrong with this guy. Then you can let go of that narrative, of that schema, that it's me, and you put it on the other person. Now, if you do that in regular therapy, it's not going to translate. You know, they may think it, but they can't feel it. What EMDR does is it bridges what we think and what we feel, that this is not about me. I can let go of the guilt. I can let go of the shame. and I can put it where it belongs on the perpetrator. So that is the, let's see. Let me get back here. Thank you. Okay. So that basically explains the neurobiology of trauma. We're not going to go through exactly how EMDR works because that's not for this. This is for the actual training. But I want you to get a sense of how and why it works. And then the last frame. So that's a neurobiology trauma. So what's the mechanism? So we know, based on Bessel van der Kolk's research, what I just explained, that we're moving trauma out of the brain and we're creating, and it creates a chemical reaction that desensitizes and allows for reprocessing. But there's also another aspect of it,
Well,
and this is called the dual attention theory.
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if it's okay to interrupt, or you're going to cover it anyway.
I'm almost finished. I'm almost finished.
Oh, okay.
This is the last slide, then we open up to questions.
Yeah.
So there is an element of distraction of the MDR. And that can be very powerful. And it's not like one or the other. It's not, okay, it's not only this or that. It's everything. It's dual attention. It's the moving the trauma from the right brain to the left brain. It's the chemical reaction. All of this contributes to the therapeutic effect and a rapid processing and rapid resolution of the trauma. When you are moving your eyes back and forth and you're tapping and you're holding a TheraTapper, which is the device that I use, it takes your attention away from the trauma and it helps you detach. It helps you to remove yourself from the trauma. So that plus the moving of the trauma from the right brain and left brain and the neurochemical reaction that causes desensitization and allows for the reprocessing, all of that is why it works. So with that, we're running late. This is the general overview of what EMDR is, what traumas are about, the different types of trauma, and how trauma is manifested neurobiologically, what the rapid eye movement does, and why EMDR is so powerful. So we have a few minutes for questions and discussion. So go ahead, Pearl.
Well, that was really going to be my question, is how much you think is the eye movements and how much you think is the tapping, because that's exactly what we're doing in the EFT tapping. It sounds
correct. So
more tapping than eye movements, to be honest.
Right. So it's interesting. I've been in EMDR for a long time. This past year, I decided, you know what, I got to get out of my box, and I went for EFT training. And I was, EMDR superior, blah blah blah. But I'm curious. I was really, really impacted. There is the bilateral stimulation, which is the common factor between EFT and, but the EFT has a different element, just like EMDR does. And I would encourage anyone to get trained in EFT. I went for it, and I'm using it. I use it collaterally, especially when I think the EMDR is not enough. I will start doing it. Because I experienced it myself. It was really very powerful. So, but with EMDR, it's tapping. It's really bilateral stimulation of the brain. It can be tapping. It can be the eye movements.
So my question then back to you is, what, as somebody like me who trains people in EFT and I only do EFT tapping, what do you think is extra that somebody coming from EFT would gain by doing EMDR?
I think it's the reprocessing. It's identifying the maladaptive schema and learning how to help people develop adaptive schemas. And there was a narrative therapist on here. You can substitute narrative for schema, pretty much the same thing. Because what we're doing is it's really narrative therapy. We're changing the narrative.
And that's what we do as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's a lot.
I'm curious what there's extra.
Well, let's put it this way. There is a lot of overlap with EFT. I'm not debating that at all. I think that the main difference for me was the emphasis on specifically concretizing the reprocessing, and that's embedded in the protocol, which I didn't see. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Questions or comments?
I was wondering with the eye movements, with the rapid eye movements. So, nystagmus. Do you know what nystagmus is? That the eye naturally moves.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that, I don't know, like how that does that naturally do some sort of level of effect, like what you're talking about?
What you're describing is not just it's not bilateral stimulation. It's the eyes moving.
Yeah.
Not in left right. It's like a shaking
right. It's
of
not
the
the
eye.
same. Yeah, it's not the same.
It's not the same. Nystagmus is
No, of course it's not the same. I just was wondering if there was any sort of
effect. Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Oh,
It's a good question.
Okay. And
Next
connected
question.
to that, because I do have nystagmus, I asked on one of the people that train EMDR, I asked her specifically if somebody with nystagmus and low, can do EMDR, and she said yes. I was wondering if you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to show you something. One thing.
Okay.
So in the protocol that I developed, which is different than standard protocol, we use what's called a TheraTapper. This is the box. These are the leads. And there's a pulse that come from this. It goes, and it's very powerful. Many of the people, especially the soldiers, for reasons I don't know, I think maybe because it's more calming, but they like this. And you don't have to move your eyes with this. It causes bilateral stimulation without eye movement. Now, I try to encourage people to do the eye movement, tracking the rhythm, because you're getting double the bilateral stimulation. It can be very powerful. But for people who have difficulty moving, like I have pretty weak eye muscles. I've had glasses since I was I think I had glasses in the womb, actually. I just have really poor vision, and I don't do well with the eye movements. That's why I love this. And it's also very passive. I can do this forever. I help people, and it also helps to induce sleep. I'm actually on a campaign raising money to bring many TheraTappers over here for therapists to use, for soldiers to use. If anybody wants to donate, I can. It's a shul in Miami Beach. We can. I guess I can post the link, because we want to purchase a large number of TheraTappers for these soldiers, as well as clinicians. They can use it when they get trained, because the standard training does not. The standard training is moving your eyes back and forth like that in front of the patient. I didn't feel comfortable with it at first. I felt it was encroaching on my personal space. It was also confusing, and whereas and I'm out of control as a patient. But with this, they're empowered. There's adjustments. They can adjust the intensity. They can adjust the pace and the length of the pulse. So they feel empowered that they can do this on their own, as opposed to having the therapist waving their fingers, which is the standard procedure. So yeah, this is good for people who don't do well with rapid eye movement. Next question. Any questions, comments?
Nobody else is going to ask long-term effects of EMDR.
Okay, great question. Khan, I think you're going to ask a question. I think I'll get you now. So I can just tell you my personal experience. This happened 35 years ago. 30, no, more than that. 38 years ago, this happened to me. I still can't attach any emotion to it. I don't identify with it. I know what happened to me. I don't, the effects are usually permanent, because once you rewire the brain, it's rewired. Once you break those dysfunctional neural pathways that are associated with the trauma, it's like breaking a vase. You can't put it back together again. And especially when you replace it with adaptive neural pathways. This wasn't my fault. This is not about me. It's about him. Or that with this woman, she had a maladaptive cognition. I can't live my life because my son died. That was the old neural pathway. New neural pathway is he wouldn't want me to be like this. New neural pathway. Once that neural pathway is established, it's really almost impossible to get. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can't say that there was never any case there was any regression. That's not true. It has, and sometimes they come back for refreshers. But I mean, literally over 1,000 patients over 30 years. I never had somebody who went back to where they were. Not once. Because the brain's rewired. So it's relatively permanent. It's a good question for somebody who's not licensed. Who else?
Anna wants to ask a question.
Please.
So are you doing sessions while you're here training everybody?
I'm doing sessions, yes. I'm volunteering for anybody who was affected by the war. So I'm here for another few weeks. I'll be back in March. Sorry?
I'd like to sign up. Is there any way that we could get trained by?
I'm going to be training, and I'm doing a training, 2-day training in March.
I'll let you know.
I'm coming back in March for this conference, and I'm going to do a 2-day training. We'll get, if everybody makes sure that you have your emails in the chat, we'll get you the information. It's a 2-day.
Are you doing sessions as well for people?
Yes. I have very limited availability at this point because I'm seeing people here, and I'm also 3 o'clock. I'm on the clock in Miami.
Okay, well, just write my name down in case you have a substitution experience. I'll jump at it.
I'll tell you what, let me give you my email address, and anybody who wants to contact me for, not just for, for any questions or any, anything, I'm happy to make myself available. It's very simple. My name, Norman Goldwasser, Gmail, no dot, no nothing. So feel free to email me if you have any questions. Feedback about this seminar. How did you all feel about it?
Excellent. This was incredibly informative. It's interesting how because some of how I work with traumas, I recreate the narrative and how we integrate that in daily life. But this is incredible, and I would love to get training with you. When
I would love to train you. Listen, that's why I'm here, because I personally experienced it. And I experienced it with soldiers, family members. There's nothing like it. Trust me. There's nothing like it. And that's
because
why.
I have a. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I had a personal trauma as well. I was in the emergency room at UCLA when I was on postdoctoral fellowship. This was 30 some odd years ago. And I had a gun held to my head by a patient that the police brought in. I was held hostage, and they told me to go home for 2 weeks and to take it easy. They had, and I said no. I'm going to come to the emergency room. I'm going to sit there. I was one of the supervisors, and I sat there because I thought if I stayed home, all I would do was think about that. And what I did was I was distracted, and I think that helped me. But it's still something that persists decades later. And I'd never done EMDR. And as I hear you talk and speak about your own trauma, and the soldiers I work with who have, some of them have extensive trauma, and it re-elicits for me the trauma. My mother was also a Shoah survivor, so it's all compacted. And it's just sitting here, I feel calm, I feel great, I feel hopeful, and I'm really looking forward to getting training with you. And I think
I'm thrilled. Thrilled. First of all, personally, because we had similar traumatic experiences during our training, and although yours was different, mine was medical, yours was a different type of trauma. But I'm also thrilled that you could take this skill and work with your patients. That's why, I have a skill set, but I can only see a few people, certain, relatively small amount of people. But if I can train a large number of therapists, you spread the wealth, you spread the skill, and exponentially greater number of people will get help. That's why we're doing this. And we're doing it in a way that's going to be very affordable and not as time consuming, because the standard training is 4 days and it's a lot of money. We're doing it just really basically, it costs 2 days, but it does require 2 days. You already got a good part of the training. I mean, this is the background, but Anyway, and by the way, I want to go back to Sharon's point because I don't want to forget that. You know, I went to a trauma conference just this past year in California, and there was a psychologist, Jewish, child of survivors. You know, it's the Zelbeschnitt, as they say in Spanish, who developed a method of trauma treatment. And it's not important what it was, but her kiddush was that she was training non-clinicians to do this in underprivileged communities, people who can't afford it. And she was trying to encourage people to get trained for this method, to train volunteers. And whoa, she wasn't expecting what she got. There was a very strong reaction among some of the clinicians there of how irresponsible that was. To have people train trauma victims and they're not trained. And she pushed back and she showed us research that different types of therapeutic interventions could be delivered by non-clinicians as effectively, in some cases, a little more effectively than trained clinicians. It depended on the person. So this is pertinent to what Sharon's point was, and that's the dialectic, because your point is correct. I'm just going to be very honest with you, and this is going to sound very unfair, but I'm going to be very transparent. My protocol is different than the standard protocol, and in ways that I think are important and I think effective. But people who are in the EMDR community are not happy with it and a little threatened by it, because I'm offering something that is recognized as a protocol that is modified, which is perfectly kosher. Dr. Shapiro encouraged people to develop modifications of their protocol to fit their situational context. There are many modifications of EMDR. So, but I've got a little bit of a target on my neck as a result of this, as you can imagine. If I compromise the standard to allow people non-licensed, my goose is going to be cooked. Just being honest. In addition to the fact that I think, generally speaking, when the person is licensed, it does demonstrate a certain standard of clinical skills that are necessary in dealing with complex trauma. And sometimes the cases are complex. Yes, Susan.
I just want to ask a question about that, because I'm not licensed in Israel either, but I don't need to be licensed because I'm a qualified psychotherapist, which allows you to practice in Israel without licensing. But I am fully qualified. I took 5 years to do my training in the United Kingdom. I'm certified in the United Kingdom, even though we don't have certification. So does that bar me as well, because I'm not licensed in Israel?
You know something, I'm as I call Amerikai Tipesh, I'm very not informed about the different standards in Israel. So when you say qualified, what does that mean specifically?
I had a 5-year program in which I trained. So the first time was an introduction to therapy. Then there was 3 solid years of that, doing a full internship within my 2nd and 3rd year, where I had 150 clients, and I had the usual impact of doing regular sessions with clients that were supervised, that were videoed. My trainers would do is we had competency tests. We had it was like hell on earth, to be honest with you, the training that I went.
So Susan, let me say the following. I'm not a rigid person by nature. I believe that in order to be in this field, you have to have some flexibility. So let me look at all this. I'm certainly inclined to say yes. Am I inclined to have somebody who has non-masters but a lot of experience? Possibly. I'm open. But I hope you understand the other side of it, in terms of I can only go so far without compromising the credibility of the program. I hope you can understand that. But let me look at Susan, what saying is very substantive.
I mean, put it this way, I have malpractice insurance in Israel, so I'm recognized within Israeli insurance. Some people aren't recognized, and I am recognized to be able to.
Well, can I just say something? I don't think there's an equivalent in the United States of a qualified therapist. I don't think that exists. Suzanne, do you think I'm correct on that? I don't think there is no equivalent, right?
No, there's no equivalent. No.
Right.
No.
So I think I need to really look at that. That may be a different credentialing that would qualify. I could see that. Yes. Karen, go.
I want to qualify I want to clarify that that's also what I was referring to. I'm not just hanging up my shingles, and I did go to a training program that is recognized in England also, and I'm on the way to getting all the hours that I need, the supervised hours that I could also be recognized there, like fulfilling their qualifications.
So I'll tell you what, Sharon, when we're going to send, once we get Susan and I get the date together, we'll send all the information. You'll send me your information and we'll look at it. Karen, you had a question.
Yeah, I have a few questions. One, my situation's a bit similar to Susan. I don't have a license in Israel, but I've been practicing for many years. I have very extensive training in a lot of different fields. I've gone for like 2-year program, certified mindfulness teacher. I've done like like a lot of intensive type of work. So I don't know if I would qualify either, but I'd be happy to send you information about myself. And the other question, just 2 quick questions. One, are there any types of clients that should not?
Great question. So that's part of the training, but I'll answer it now.
And also, like what I said, I had an unfortunate experience, obviously, with someone who was not well trained that I had many years ago. Yes. Which was traumatizing, actually,
Yes.
Yeah. I have some issues related to childhood trauma, but I'm actively working on that. So what I want to know is if you are trained in this, can it reactivate you as a therapist some of your own unfinished trauma? Yeah. And should you then explore even some sessions for yourself before you even practice?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Two great questions.
And I like your email also.
Oh, it's simple, right?
Your email. Can you put your email on the chat?
Susan, would you mind doing that? It's just my name, Norman Goldwasser at Gmail.
Okay.
The best way to reach me.
Okay.
You remind me what your first question is, Karen, again? I forgot.
I was just saying that Susan and I are similar.
No, there was a question you had.
Oh, there were 2 other questions. Was one, who shouldn't get EMD?
That's it. Okay, fine. Yep, I got it. Okay, so this is part of the training, but I'll just give you a sneak preview. Anyone who is constitutionally unstable, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, borderline. Those are the 3 main. Now, the only suffix is borderline. It depends on where they're on the spectrum. Just because they have that diagnosis doesn't mean that they're disqualified. That has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The general cloud is that those that are more in the severe, that have been hospitalizations, even though we know that borderline comes from trauma almost always, you have to be very cautious about borderline. But bipolar and schizophrenia are basically relaxed because you're just trying to keep them stable. Once you open them up, you know where it's going to. Yes, Suzanne.
I work a lot with bipolar patients, and there's, it's a spectrum condition. So people who are low at the spectrum, bipolar type 2 versus bipolar type 1, which is much more traumatic and dangerous. But bipolar type 2, which is it's mild. So
thank you for absolutely on target.
How would you?
I'll tell you.
Would that be appropriate low-end bipolar condition type 2?
Yeah. Excellent correction on your part of me. There is a difference between type 1 and type 2, a big difference. So actually in bipolar type 2, it's really helpful because the bipolar 2 patients that I work with are mostly dysregulated as a kind of a general. It's not like I'm it's not phasic, you know, manic, and they're just emotionally dysregulated. And quite often there's a real fine line between bipolar 2 and PTSD and trauma.
Right.
So I've found it to be really helpful with bipolar type 2. But the classic bipolar 1, the goal is to keep them contained. And we really don't, if they're really classic bipolar 1, it's pretty much a rule out. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Questions, comments? Okay. So was there someone else?
I would just like to say thank you to you for giving your time to us today. It's been, as was the last training, but this has been really informative. And thank you so much for taking your time in such a busy schedule and for all that you're doing for everybody here in Israel, for the soldiers and everybody. You know, it's truly wonderful. And we're all here together to try and help better the mental health state of our IDF and the Israeli population in general. And that's the whole that's the whole point of why we're here. So thank you.
As they say in the UK, pleasure. If you want to post any, I see people are posting comments. If you want to post any comments, you can do that or send it to my email. And it doesn't always have to be, you know, if you have any comments about what you think could be done differently or better, I'm always looking to improve it. Some people come up with suggestions that are very helpful. But in general, it was a pleasure spending time with you. I'm grateful that there was such an interest in this. And when we send out the information for the training, you know, you can spread it around with your colleagues. We really would like to have as many people as possible. The other thing I haven't really mentioned to Susan, but I didn't realize what a large network you all have. And I'm happy to do webinars on different subjects. You know, I'm doing this. It's, you know, instead of just seeing patients all day long, I like this. It energizes me. So if you have any suggestions of topics that you would like for me to present on, I'm happy. And if it's within my skill set, within my area of expertise, you know, one of the things that I published 2 books, one on narcissism, how to overcome narcissism. Happy to talk about that. I've also published a book recently called CQ, which is a changeability quotient, like IQ, EQ. It's about assessing the ability to change, which I think as clinicians you may be interested in. So any of those things, I'm happy to take the time. It's my pleasure, especially now. So since there were people in the States, we do have to do it in the afternoon Israel time. I don't think I'm not that good. People are going to wake up at 3 a.m. to hear me, that's for sure. All right.
Wait, what's the name of the book on narcissism?
It's called Breaking the Mirror.
Okay, thank you.
You can get it on Amazon. It's
thank you.
It's for people, and by the way, it's not just for the client who has narcissistic personality disorder. It's for those who have traits, but there's also a section for partners or parents of people with narcissism, how to deal with them effectively. So I'll show you the cover. Oops, I just gave it to the mother of a patient of mine whose husband is very narcissistic, and she was going to give it back to me tomorrow.
Okay.
So I don't have it, but it's on Amazon, Breaking the Mirror. Anyway, any other questions or comments?
No, but we'd like to welcome you back. So
I'm happy to come back. Absolutely. This is it's a pleasure for me. Really, it's a privilege.
we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch. I'm speaking to you again anyway shortly, aren't I?
Yes, yes, we will. Okay. And have the rest, whatever the rest of Hanukkah Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you,
Take care.
everyone, for taking the time to join today. It's been good to see
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been good to meet everybody who's not part of Tikva by Kipolim. Thank you for joining as well. It's been a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Hanukkah Sameach for the remainder of Hanukkah. Take care. Bye.
Bye.